Dakota Territory, 1874. A land where hope and heartbreak rode side by side across endless prairies, where families seeking new beginnings could find themselves face to face with unimaginable loss in the span of a single sunrise. For the Bennett, a family, the journey west represented everything they had dreamed of during those cramped years in Boston's factory district. Freedom, open skies, and soil of their own to farm. 10-year-old Sarah Bennett pressed her face against the canvas of their covered wagon, watching the landscape roll past in waves of golden grass. The Patterson Company had been traveling for nearly 4 months, and Sarah had memorized every creak of their wagon wheels, every voice in their party of 28 families. Her father, Thomas Bennett, had sold everything they owned for this. No chance at a new life in Montana Territory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of September 15th began like countless others on the trail. Sarah woke to the gentle swaying of the wagon, her younger brother James still sleeping beside her. Through the canvas opening, she could see her mother, Mary, already up and preparing breakfast over the communal fire. The Patterson Company had made camp the previous evening at Dry Creek Crossing, a well-known stopping point where a trickle of water cut through the otherwise parched landscape. Sarah climbed down from the wagon, her bare feet touching the cool earth. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon, but the eastern sky showed pale pink and orange streaks that promised another scorching day ahead. She loved these quiet morning moments before the camp fully awakened, when she could pretend they were the only souls for miles around. Her father emerged from checking the oxen, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the growing light. Thomas Bennett had been a mill worker in Boston, his hands more accustomed to machinery than livestock, but the months on the trail had transformed him. His face had grown lean and weathered, his hands calloused from handling reins and ropes. He smiled when he saw Sarah reaching down to tousle her dark hair. "Morning, little bird," he said, using the nickname he'd given her years ago. "Sleep well?" Sarah nodded, following him toward the fire where her mother was stirring a pot of porridge. The other families were beginning to stir, children emerging. From wagons, men tending to animals, women gathering around cooking fires. It was a routine they had perfected over months of travel, each family playing their part in the larger symphony of survival. Mrs. Patterson, the wagon master's wife, called out a greeting as she passed. The Pattersons had been making this journey for over a decade, guiding families like the Bennetts toward their dreams. Sarah had grown particularly fond of their daughter, Emma, who at 12 was the closest to her own age in the wagon train. As Sarah helped her mother with breakfast, she noticed the men gathering near the Patterson wagon. Their voices were low, urgent. Her father joined them, and she saw his expression darken as Mr. Patterson spoke. The guide pointed toward the hills, to the north, shaking his head grimly. "What do you think they're talking about?" Sarah asked her mother. Mary Bennett followed her daughter's gaze, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "Probably just planning the day's route," she said, but Sarah heard the uncertainty in her voice. Her mother had developed a sixth sense for trouble during their journey, and Sarah had learned to read the subtle signs of her worry. The meeting broke up, and the men dispersed to their own wagons with troubled expressions. Thomas returned to his family, accepting a bowl of porridge from his wife with distracted thanks. "Thomas," Mary asked quietly. He glanced at the children before responding. "Patterson says there have been raids north of here. A freight company was attacked last week." He lowered his voice further. "He wants us to push hard today, make it to Fort Madison by nightfall." Sarah felt a chill despite the warming air. They had heard stories of attacks along the trail, but they had always seemed distant, happening to other people in other places. The reality that danger might be close enough to alter their plans sent a ripple of fear through her. The camp broke with unusual efficiency that morning. Wagons were loaded quickly, teams hitched without the usual chatter and delay. Sarah noticed how the men kept their rifles close, how the women hurried the children along with sharp words when they dawdled. Even the animals seemed to sense the tension, the oxen lowing nervously as they were yoked. By the time the sun had fully risen, the Patterson Company was moving. The wagons rolled out in their practiced formation, but tighter than usual, the gaps between them reduced. Outriders flanked the column, men Sarah recognized as the best shots in their group. Her father drove their wagon with focused attention, his rifle propped within easy reach. Sarah sat in the back of the wagon with James and her mother, pretending to read from her McGuffey reader, but the words blurred before her eyes. She kept thinking about the meeting that morning, the worry in the men's faces. Her mother was mending one of James's shirts, her needle moving in precise mechanical stitches, but Sarah noticed how often she glanced toward the wagon's opening. The morning passed without incident. The trail wound through low hills dotted with scattered pines, following the course of Dry Creek as it meandered northward. Sarah watched the landscape pass, trying to shake off her unease. She had learned to find beauty, even in this harsh country. The way the light played across the grass, the distant smudge of mountains on the horizon, the occasional flash of color from a wildflower blooming despite the drought. Around midday, they stopped briefly to rest the animals and eat a cold lunch. Sarah helped her mother distribute hardtack and dried beef to her father and brother. The men remained vigilant, eating quickly while scanning the surrounding hills. Mr. Patterson rode up and down the line, checking on each family, his weathered face set in grim lines. "How much further to the fort?" Sarah heard someone ask. 8 miles, maybe 9, Patterson replied. "We'll make it before dark if we keep this pace." They resumed their journey, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly. Sarah dozed fitfully in the wagon's shade, lulled by the rhythmic creaking of wheels and the steady plodding of the oxen. She dreamed of their old home in Boston, of playing, in the narrow alley behind their tenement, of her grandmother's voice singing Irish lullabies. She woke to the sound of shouting. The wagon had stopped, and her father was standing on the driver's seat, shading his eyes as he peered ahead. Other wagons had halted as well, the entire column bunching up like an accordion. Sarah heard the word passed back from wagon to wagon, "Riders coming!" Her mother pulled both children close, her arms tightening around them. Through the wagon's front opening, Sarah could see a dust cloud approaching from the north. As it drew nearer, she could make out individual riders, perhaps a dozen men, moving fast. "Could be cavalry," someone called out hopefully. But as the riders came into clearer view, that hope evaporated. These weren't soldiers. They wore no uniforms, carried no flags. They were rough-looking men on lathered horses, and something about their approach sent alarm racing through the wagon train. Mr. Patterson was shouting orders, his voice carrying over the sudden chaos. "Circle up! Get those wagons in a circle! Women and children to the center!" The next few moments were a blur of motion and noise. Sarah's father leaped from the wagon seat, unhitching the oxen with practiced speed, while her mother gathered the children. Wagons were wheeled into a defensive formation they had practiced but never needed to use. Men checked their weapons. Women herded children into the relative safety of the circle's center. Sarah found herself crouched behind a wagon wheel with her mother and brother, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The riders had spread out as they approached, no longer bunched together but forming a loose line that seemed to curve around the wagon train like a closing fist. "Stay down," her mother whispered fiercely. "No matter what happens, stay down." Through the spokes of the wagon wheel, Sarah watched the riders draw closer. They had slowed, now walking their horses forward with deliberate menace. She could see their faces, hard, weathered men with cold eyes. Some wore pieces of military uniform, others dressed in buckskin and homespun. All were heavily armed. The lead rider, A tall man with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw raised his hand, and the others stopped. For a moment, silence hung heavy over the scene. Then he spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Afternoon, folks," he called out, his tone deceptively friendly. "Name's Luther Creed. My boys and I are looking for some Indians who've been causing trouble in these parts. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thought you good people might have seen something." Mr. Patterson stepped forward from behind his wagon, his rifle held loosely but ready. "Haven't seen any Indians," he replied. "We're just passing through, heading to Fort Madison." Creed smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Is that so? Well, that's a shame. See, we've been tracking a war party that hit a settlement south of here, killed a bunch of innocent folks. We're what you might call a citizens' militia, trying to keep these lands safe for decent people like yourselves." Something about the man's words sent a chill through Sarah. She pressed closer to her mother, who had gone very still. "We appreciate your concern," Patterson said carefully, "but we haven't seen any sign of hostiles. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to make the fort before nightfall." Creed's smile faded. He shifted in his saddle, and Sarah saw his hand move closer to his pistol. "Now that's not very neighborly," he said. "Here we are trying to protect settlers like you, and you're in such an all-fired hurry to leave. Makes a man wonder what you might be hiding." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah could feel her mother trembling beside her, could hear James whimpering softly. The men of the wagon train stood ready behind their makeshift barricades, but they were outnumbered and caught in the open. "We're hiding nothing," Patterson insisted. "We're families, women and children. We want no trouble." "No trouble," Creed repeated as if tasting the words. "That's good to hear, because trouble is exactly what those Indians brought to the Harris homestead. You know what they did there to the women, to the children." His voice had taken on a harder edge. "We can't let that happen again, can we, boys?" The other riders murmured agreement, some of them grinning in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. She noticed that several wore items that seemed out of place: a woman's locket, a child's toy hanging from a saddle horn. Her young mind couldn't quite process what she was seeing, but instinct told her these were not the protectors they claimed to be. "Tell you what," Creed continued, "why don't you folks make camp here for the night? We'll keep watch, make sure no hostiles bother you. Come morning, we'll escort you safe to the fort." Patterson shook his head. "Thank you for the offer, but we'll push on." The change happened so fast, Sarah almost missed it. Creed's genial mask dropped entirely, replaced by something cold and predatory. "I wasn't asking," he said softly. Then everything exploded into chaos. The first gunshot cracked across the prairie like thunder. Sarah saw Mr. Patterson spin and fall, his rifle clattering from his hands. Her mother screamed, pulling both children flat against the ground as bullets began flying from both sides. The men of the wagon train fought back desperately, but they had been caught off guard. Creed's riders had spread out, flanking the circled wagons, pouring fire into the defenders from multiple angles. Women screamed, children cried, men shouted, orders and curses as they tried to return fire. Sarah's father appeared suddenly, diving behind their wagon, his rifle spitting flame as he fired at the attackers. "Stay down!" he roared at his family. "Mary, keep them down!" Through her terror, Sarah watched him fight. Thomas Bennett, the mild-mannered mill worker from Boston, had become something fierce and primal, defending his family with desperate courage. She saw him hit one of the raiders, sending the man tumbling from his saddle. But there were too many of them, and they had the advantage of mobility and surprise. One by one, the defenders fell. Sarah saw Emma Patterson running toward her mother, saw her cut down mid-stride. She saw old Mr. Henderson, who had taught her to whittle during the long evening camps, clutch his chest and topple forward. The raiders had dismounted now, moving among the wagons with terrible efficiency. Some wore bandanas over their faces, but others didn't bother. They shot anyone who moved, showed no mercy to those who begged. Sarah heard Creed's voice rising. Above the carnage, giving orders, directing his men to check every wagon, leave no one alive. Her father was still firing, but his ammunition was running low. Sarah saw him look back at his family, saw the desperate love and sorrow in his eyes. He knew, she realized, he knew they were all going to die. "Thomas!" her mother cried out as a raider appeared around the end of their wagon. Her father spun, firing his last shot, but the raider was faster. Thomas Bennett fell backward, his rifle slipping from nerveless fingers. Mary Bennett screamed, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to tear from her very soul. She threw herself over her children, as if her body could shield them from what was coming. The raider stepped closer, his pistol rising. Sarah looked up into his face, a young man, perhaps 25, with cold blue eyes and a scraggly beard. For a moment their eyes met, and she saw something flicker there. Hesitation, regret, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by blank determination. The gun boomed. Sarah felt her mother's body jerk, felt the warm splash of blood. James was crying, a high, thin wail that seemed to come from very far away. The raider aimed again. The world exploded in noise and pain and terror. Sarah felt impacts, felt her brother go limp beside her, but strangely, she felt no pain herself. She lay very still, covered by her mother's body, warm blood soaking through her dress. She kept her eyes closed, barely breathing as boots moved past. "Check them all," Creed's voice commanded. "Make sure no one's playing possum." Sarah held her breath as footsteps approached. Someone kicked at the pile of bodies that had been her family. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasted blood. "These ones are done for," a voice said. The footsteps moved away. For what seemed like hours, Sarah lay motionless. She heard the raiders moving through the camp, taking what they wanted, discussing their plans. To her horror, she realized they were changing clothes, putting on items, taken from the wagons. "Remember," Creed's voice carried clearly, "we're a Sioux war party, that's the story. These settlers were heading for the fort when the savages got them. We tried to help, but arrived too late." "What about the bodies?" someone asked. "Someone might notice the bullet wounds don't match Indian weapons." "That's why we're burning the wagons," Creed replied. "Fire hides a lot of sins. By the time anyone finds this, it'll just be ashes and bones." Sarah heard them splashing. Liquid, kerosene from the cooking supplies. The sharp smell filled her nostrils. Panic rose in her throat. They were going to burn everything, everyone. She was going to be burned alive. But as the flames began to crackle and smoke filled the air, survival instinct took over. Sarah began to squirm free from beneath her mother's body. Every movement was agony, not from physical wounds, but from the soul-deep pain of leaving her family. Her dress was soaked with blood, making her slippery. She managed to wriggle free just as the first flames reached their wagon. Coughing, eyes streaming from the smoke, Sarah crawled on her belly toward the edge of the circle. The raiders were busy with their grim work, setting fires, ensuring their deception was complete. In the chaos and smoke, no one noticed one small girl dragging herself through the dirt. She reached the tall grass beyond the wagons and kept crawling. Behind her, the flames roared higher, consuming everything she had known. Her family, her friends, her entire world was turning to ash. But Sarah Bennett crawled on, driven by an instinct older than thought, older than grief, the instinct to survive. When she had crawled far enough that the smoke no longer choked her, Sarah finally collapsed. She lay in the grass, listening to the distant shouts of the raiders, the crackle of flames, the occasional gunshot as they made sure of their work. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. She had learned in those terrible moments that silence meant survival. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of red that matched the flames behind, her Sarah Bennett lay alone in the vast Dakota Prairie. She was 10 years old, orphaned, traumatized beyond measure and utterly alone, but she was alive, and somewhere in the distance, though she didn't yet know it, another soul marked by loss was moving through the same wilderness, his own path, about to intersect with hers in ways that would change both their lives forever. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the prairie as Sarah lay hidden in the grass. Her small body ached from the crawl and the blood on. Her dress had begun to dry, stiffening the fabric against her skin. She could still hear the raiders in the distance, their voices carrying on the evening wind as they completed their terrible work. The smell of smoke grew stronger, and when she finally dared to lift her head, she saw the orange glow rising into the darkening sky. Everything was gone. The realization hit her with crushing finality. Her parents, her brother James, the Patterson family, Emma, who had become her closest friend during the long journey, all reduced to ash and memory. Sarah pressed her face into the earth, muffling the sobs that threatened to escape. She had learned the hard way that sound could mean death. As darkness fell, the voices of the raiders began to fade. She heard horses moving away, the sound growing distant until only the crackling of the fires remained. Still, Sarah didn't move. Terror kept her frozen in place, every shadow potentially hiding one of Creed's men, every rustle of grass a threat. Hours passed. The fires burned lower, the night grew cold, and Sarah's young body began to shiver uncontrollably. She had no coat, no blanket, nothing but the blood-stained dress she wore. The September night on the Dakota plains was merciless, the temperature dropping rapidly once the sun's warmth disappeared. Thirst began to torment her. She hadn't had water since the morning, and the smoke had parched her throat. Sarah knew she needed to move, needed to find water and shelter, but fear paralyzed her. What if they came back? What if they were watching, waiting for survivors to show themselves? It was the cold that finally forced her to action. Her teeth chattering, her small body racked with shivers, Sarah began to crawl again. She moved away from the burning wagons, deeper into the prairie, guided only by instinct and the desperate need to survive. The tall grass whispered around her, and she imagined it was her mother's voice, urging her forward. She crawled until her hands were raw and bleeding, until her knees could no longer bear the contact with the ground. Then she stood on shaking legs and walked. The night was moonless, the darkness nearly complete. Sarah stumbled frequently, falling into hidden depressions, tripping over rocks and roots. Each fall sent new waves of pain through her exhausted body, but she got up every time and continued. Water. She needed water. Sarah remembered her father teaching her that streams and creeks in this country generally flowed toward larger rivers. If she could find dry creek again, she could follow it. But which direction was the creek? In the darkness, with no stars visible through the smoke-hazed sky, she had no way to orient herself. She walked through the night, putting one foot in front of the other with mechanical determination. Sometimes she thought she heard voices calling her name, but when she stopped to listen, there was only the wind. Sometimes she saw lights in the distance, but when she blinked, they were gone. Exhaustion and trauma were playing tricks on her mind. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Sarah found herself at the edge of a small grove of cottonwood trees. The sight of the trees filled her with hope. Cottonwoods meant water nearby. She pushed through the underbrush, branches catching at her dress, leaving scratches on her exposed skin. There it was, a small stream, barely more than a trickle. But to Sarah, it looked like salvation. She fell to her knees at the water's edge, cupping the cool liquid in her hands and drinking greedily, too greedily. Her empty stomach rebelled, and she vomited the water back up, retching painfully. This time she drank more carefully, small sips that her body could handle. The water soothed her raw throat and brought a measure of clarity to her thoughts. She needed to think, to plan. She couldn't just wander aimlessly. Fort Madison, that's where they had been heading. But how far was it? Which direction? Sarah tried to remember the conversations she'd overheard. 8 or 9 miles, Mr. Patterson had said, but that was from where they'd stopped for lunch. How far had they traveled before the attack? How far had she crawled and walked during the night? She had no way to know. The sun rose higher, warming her chilled body. Sarah found a hollow beneath some thick bushes where she could hide and rest. Exhaustion overwhelmed her, and despite her fear, she fell into a fitful sleep. In her dreams, she was back in the wagon, her mother singing softly as she sewed, her father whistling as he drove the oxen, James playing with his wooden soldiers. She woke calling for them, then remembered with crushing despair that they were gone. The day passed in a blur of fear and grief. Sarah remained hidden in her hollow, venturing out only to drink from the stream. She found some late blackberries, growing wild, and ate them despite their sour taste. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she didn't dare venture far from her hiding place. As the second night approached, Sarah knew she had to make a decision. She couldn't stay here forever. She needed to find help, to reach Fort Madison or another settlement, but the thought of leaving her hiding place, of venturing back into the open prairie, filled her with terror. It was thirst that drove her out again. The little stream was drying up in the late summer heat, and Sarah had to range farther to find pools deep enough to drink from. She followed the stream bed, hoping it would lead to a larger source of water. The stream led her into rougher country, the prairie giving way to rocky hills and deeper ravines. Sarah struggled over the broken terrain, her dress catching on thorns, her shoes, sturdy boots made for a city child, not wilderness travel, beginning to come apart from the abuse. On the third day, disaster struck. Sarah was climbing down into a ravine, following what looked like a game trail, when loose rocks shifted beneath her feet. She fell hard, tumbling down the slope in a cascade of dirt and stones. When she came to rest at the bottom, her left ankle was twisted beneath her, sending shoots of agony up her leg. She sat in the ravine's bottom, tears streaming down her face, not just from the pain, but from the hopelessness of her situation. She couldn't walk. She was alone, injured, with no food and little water. This was where she would die, she thought. This nameless ravine would be her grave, but the human will to survive is a powerful thing, especially in the young. After the initial wave of despair passed, Sarah began to think again. She couldn't walk normally, but perhaps she could hobble. She found a sturdy stick and used it as a crutch. Progress was agonizingly slow, but it was progress. She spent that night in a small cave she found in the ravine wall. It wasn't much more than an overhang of rock, but it provided shelter from the wind. Sarah gathered dry grass and leaves to make a bed of sorts, though sleeping on the hard ground made her body ache even more. Hunger had become a constant companion. The blackberries were long gone, and Sarah had found nothing else edible. She tried eating grass, as she'd seen horses do, but it only made her sick. She found some roots that looked like wild carrots, but fear of poison kept her from eating them. Her father had warned her about plants that looked safe, but could kill. On the fourth day, Sarah's progress slowed to a crawl. Her ankle had swollen terribly, and even with the makeshift crutch, each step was agony. She was growing weaker from lack of food, and her thoughts were becoming confused. Sometimes she forgot where she was, thinking she was back in Boston, or still in the wagon with her family. She found water again, a small spring seeping from rocks, and drank deeply. But water alone couldn't sustain her much longer. Sarah knew with a clarity that surprised her that she was dying. The knowledge brought an odd peace. Soon she would be with her family again. The thought was almost comforting. She made it to a small grove of pines as the sun began to set. The trees offered shelter from the wind that had begun to blow strongly from the north. Sarah collapsed beneath the largest pine, no longer able to continue. She curled into a ball, trying to conserve what little warmth her body still generated. As darkness fell, Sarah's mind began to wander. She saw her mother standing nearby, smiling, reaching out to her. She heard her father's voice calling her little bird. James was there too, wanting to play. Sarah reached out to them, but they faded like mist. She became aware of other presences in the darkness. Animals, perhaps. She heard rustling in the underbrush, caught glimpses of movement at the edge of her vision. Wolves, coyotes. It didn't matter anymore. Sarah was too weak to feel fear. Then she heard something else. Footsteps. Not the light padding of an animal, but the deliberate tread of a human. Someone was approaching through the darkness. Sarah tried to call out, but her voice was gone, her throat too dry to produce more than a whisper. The footsteps stopped. In the dim starlight filtering through the pine branches, Sarah saw a figure standing a few yards away. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with careful deliberation. She tried again to speak, to call for help, but only managed a faint croak. The figure moved closer, and Sarah could make out more details. A man dressed in buckskin and leather, with long dark hair and a face marked by lines of weathering and sorrow. He carried weapons. She could see the outline of a rifle, but something in his bearing spoke of caution rather than threat. He knelt beside her, and in the faint light, Sarah saw his face clearly for the first time. Strong features, dark eyes that held depths of pain and understanding, skin the deep copper color of the native peoples. He spoke, but the words were in the language she didn't understand. Then, seeing her confusion, he tried again in accented English. "Little one," he said softly, "I am Iron Bear. I will not hurt you." Sarah tried to respond, but no words came. Her eyes fluttered closed. Consciousness fading. The last thing she remembered was strong arms lifting her, the smell of leather and wood smoke, and a voice murmuring words she didn't understand, but which somehow conveyed safety and protection. When Sarah woke, she was no longer on the cold ground beneath the pines. She lay on soft furs near a small fire, its warmth seeping into her chilled body. The smell of cooking meat made her stomach clench with hunger. She tried to sit up, but gentle hands pressed her back down. "Rest," the voice said. "You are safe now." Sarah looked up into the face of the man who had found her. By firelight, she could see him more clearly. He appeared to be in his 30s, with powerful shoulders and hands that moved with surprising gentleness as he tended the fire. His dark eyes held a sadness that seemed etched into their depths, and Sarah sensed that this man had known loss as profound as her own. "Water," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Iron Bear produced a water skin, helping her drink slowly. The cool liquid was like life itself flowing back into her body. When she'd had enough, he offered her a piece of meat, cooked and cut into small pieces. Sarah ate carefully, her shrunken stomach protesting at first, then accepting the nourishment. It so desperately needed. "What is your name, little one?" Iron Bear asked when she had finished eating. "Sarah," she managed. "Sarah Bennett." "Where are your people, Sarah Bennett?" The question brought everything rushing back. The attack, the screams, the fire. Her family's bodies piled together. Tears began to flow, and Sarah turned her face away, unable to speak. Iron Bear said nothing, but she felt him settle beside her, his presence a comfort despite her barely knowing him. When her tears finally subsided, he spoke again. "I found tracks," he said quietly. "Many wagons, then fire. Bad men came." Sarah nodded, still unable to form words around her grief. "You escaped alone." Another nod. Iron Bear was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of understanding that made Sarah look at him more closely. "3 moons passed. Bad men came to my village too, at Willow Creek. My wife, Morning Star, my son, Little Crow. They did not escape. The shared pain created a connection between them that needed no words. Sarah saw in Iron Bear's eyes the same loss she carried, the same emptiness where loved ones had been. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. "The men who attacked us." Sarah finally found her voice. "They dressed like Indians, but they weren't. They were white men, led by someone named Luther Creed. They wanted people to think natives did it." Iron Bear's expression hardened. "I know this Creed. He has done this before, creates war between our peoples, profits from the hatred." They sat in silence as the fire burned lower. Sarah felt a strange comfort in this man's presence. He had saved her, yes, but it was more than that. He understood. He knew what it meant to lose everything, to be alone in a world that had suddenly become hostile and dangerous. "Where will you go?" Iron Bear asked eventually. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know. We were going to Montana Territory. My father had family there, but..." She trailed off, overwhelmed by the impossibility of completing such a journey alone. "You cannot travel alone," Iron Bear said firmly. "Too dangerous for a child." "I have nowhere else to go," Sarah whispered. Iron Bear studied her for a long moment. Then he seemed to come to a decision. "My people camp 2 days' journey from here. You come with me, rest, heal, then we decide what is best." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest for the first time since the attack. "Your people won't mind. I'm white. You are a child who needs help," Iron Bear said simply. "Among the Lakota, that is all that matters." As the night deepened around them, Sarah felt some of the terrible tension leave her body. She was still lost, still grieving, still afraid. But she was no longer alone. This man, this warrior who had lost his own family, had chosen to help her. It was a small light in the darkness, but it was enough to keep her going. Iron Bear built up the fire and arranged the furs to make Sarah more comfortable. He cleaned and bandaged her injured ankle with herbs and cloth strips from his pack. His movements were efficient but gentle, and Sarah remembered her father working with similar care when she or James had been hurt. "Sleep now," Iron Bear said when he had finished. "Tomorrow we begin the journey to my people. You will need strength." Sarah nodded, exhaustion pulling at her, despite the thoughts churning in her mind. As she drifted towards sleep, she watched Iron Bear through half-closed eyes. He sat by the fire, his profile stern against the dancing flames, keeping watch over her as naturally as if she had been his own daughter. In that moment, Sarah Bennett understood that sometimes the family you're born with isn't the only family you can have. Sometimes, in the midst of loss and pain, new connections form. Sometimes two broken souls can help each other heal. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Iron Bear pulling something from his pack, a small wooden horse, carved with patient skill. He held it gently, his thumb running over its familiar contours, and Sarah realized it must have belonged to his son. The sight of this strong warrior cherishing a child's toy brought fresh tears to her eyes, but these were different tears. These were tears of understanding, of shared humanity, of hope that perhaps they could help each other navigate the long path through grief that lay ahead. Morning came with a gentle mist rising from the creek bed where Iron Bear had made their camp. Sarah woke to find him already moving about, tending the horses he had brought, his own mount and a smaller pony that seemed gentler in temperament. The smell of something cooking drew her attention to the fire, where he was preparing what looked like a grain porridge mixed with dried berries. Her ankle throbbed as she tried to sit up, and Iron Bear was immediately at her side, helping her into a more comfortable position. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. His face bore the weathering of someone who had spent years under the open sky, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and his hands, while gentle with her, showed the calluses of a warrior's training. "How does the ankle feel?" he asked, kneeling to examine her injury. "It hurts," Sarah admitted. but not as bad as yesterday. Iron Bear nodded, producing more of the herbs he had used the night before. As he worked, Sarah noticed the care he took with everything, the precise way he measured the herbs, the gentle but firm manner in which he re-wrapped her ankle. Her father had been careful like this when he worked on the machinery at the mill, taking pride in doing things properly. "We will travel slowly today," Iron Bear said. "You will ride the pony. Her name is Gentle Rain. She carried my son once." The mention of his son brought a flicker of pain across his features, quickly suppressed. Sarah understood that suppression, the way grief could ambush you at unexpected moments. She had already learned to brace herself against those sudden waves of memory. After they had eaten, Iron Bear helped Sarah onto the pony. True to her name, Gentle Rain stood perfectly still as the injured girl settled into the simple saddle. Iron Bear adjusted the stirrups to accommodate Sarah's shorter legs, then fashioned a support for her injured ankle. "Have you ridden before?" he asked. "Only a few times on my uncle's farm," Sarah replied. "Never alone. Gentle Rain knows the way. Trust her. If you need to stop, tell me." They set out as the morning sun climbed higher, Iron Bear leading on foot, while his own horse followed unburdened. The pace was deliberately slow, allowing Sarah to adjust to the rhythm of riding. The landscape around them was different from the open prairie where the wagon train had traveled, more broken country with scattered groves of trees and rocky outcroppings. As they traveled, Iron Bear began to talk, perhaps sensing that silence left too much room for dark thoughts. He spoke of the land they were passing through, naming plants and their uses, pointing out animal signs that Sarah would never have noticed on her own. "See there," he said, indicating a series of scratches on a tree trunk. "Bear marking, male, claiming territory. We go around, give him respect." Sarah found herself drawn into his quiet instruction. It was different from the way her father had taught her things, less formal, more integrated with the immediate world around them. When they stopped to rest the horses, Iron Bear showed her how to read the age of tracks, how to tell which direction. The wind had been blowing by the way grass was bent. "Why are you teaching me these things?" Sarah asked during one such lesson. Iron Bear considered the question seriously. "Knowledge helps us survive, and teaching." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Teaching honors those who taught us." Sarah understood. Her mother had always said that passing on what you knew was a way of keeping people alive, even after they were gone. She wondered who had taught Iron Bear these skills, imagined him as a boy learning from his father or uncles the way she was learning now. The day grew warm as they continued their journey. Iron Bear stopped frequently to check on Sarah, offering water, adjusting her position on the pony, watching for signs of pain or exhaustion. During one stop, he produced a piece of dried fruit from his pack, something Sarah didn't recognize. "Chokecherry," he explained. "Good for strength. My wife made these." Again, that flicker of pain, quickly hidden. Sarah accepted the fruit, finding it tart but pleasant. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. "Your wife." Iron Bear was silent for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, distant. Morning Star was her name. Beautiful, like the star that comes before dawn. Strong, too, stronger than me in many ways. She could make anyone laugh, even when times were hard. And she sang. Her voice could make the birds stop to listen. He fell silent again, lost in memory. Sarah waited, understanding the need for these pauses, these moments when the past felt more real than the present. "She was teaching our son her songs," Iron Bear continued. "Little Crow had her voice, her joy. 9 winters old, always running, always laughing. He loved horses, wanted to be a great rider like his uncle." My brother James was 7, Sarah offered. He collected rocks, called them his treasures, drove my mother mad with the weight in his pockets. They shared these memories as they traveled, trading stories of the families they had lost. It was a strange comfort, this exchange of grief. Sarah found that talking about James and her parents to someone who truly understood such loss made the pain both sharper and somehow more bearable. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change again. They were climbing gradually into higher country, the air cooler despite the sun. Iron Bear's vigilance increased, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Several times he stopped to study their back trail, though he said nothing to alarm Sarah. "Are we being followed?" she finally asked. "Perhaps," he replied honestly. "Creed's men sometimes return to their crimes, looking for survivors, witnesses. We must be careful." Fear crept back into Sarah's chest, memories of that terrible day flooding back. Iron Bear noticed her distress and moved closer to gentle Rain, his presence reassuring. "I will not let them harm you," he said simply, and Sarah believed him. They made camp that evening beside a small spring in a sheltered valley. Iron Bear chose the spot carefully. Good sight lines in all directions, multiple escape routes if needed, fresh water nearby. He tended to Sarah first, checking her ankle, helping her to a comfortable spot near where he would build the fire. "I can help," Sarah offered as he began gathering wood. "Your job is to heal," Iron Bear replied. "But if you wish to be useful, you can prepare the fire circle, clear the ground, gather stones." It was a simple task, but Sarah was grateful for something to do. She worked carefully, remembering how her father had always insisted on proper fire safety during their journey. As she placed stones in a circle, she found herself thinking about all the campfires her family had shared, all the evenings that had seemed so ordinary at the time, but now felt precious beyond measure. Iron Bear returned with wood and kindling, nodding approval at her fire circle. He arranged the materials with practiced efficiency, then produced flint and steel from his pack. Sarah watched, fascinated, as he struck sparks into a small nest of dry grass, blowing gently until flames caught. "My father used matches," she said, "from the general store." "Matches are good," Iron Bear agreed. "But flint and steel never run out, never get wet and useless. The old ways have value." As the fire grew, he began preparing their evening meal. From his pack came strips of dried meat, a small pouch of cornmeal, and more of the dried berries. He mixed these with water, in a small pot creating a stew of sorts. The simplicity of the meal reminded Sarah of how elaborate their wagon train dinners had seemed, with multiple families sharing dishes, children running between the fires, laughter mixing with the clink of tin plates. "You're sad again," Iron Bear observed. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Grief is like a storm," he said, stirring the pot. "Sometimes it comes suddenly violent. Sometimes it is a steady rain that lasts for days. We cannot stop it, only shelter from it when we can." They ate in companionable silence as darkness fell. The night sounds of the wilderness began. The call of night birds, the rustle of small creatures, the distant howl of wolves. Sarah shivered, moving closer to the fire. "The wolves won't come near," Iron Bear assured her. "They avoid humans unless desperate, and I am here." After the meal, he checked her ankle again, applying fresh herbs and rewrapping the bandages. The swelling had gone down somewhat, though the joint was still painful to move. As he worked, Sarah found herself studying his face, seeing in it a kind of strength she hadn't encountered before. Not the bluster of some men she had known, but a quiet certainty, a competence born of deep knowledge and experience. "How did you know where to find me?" she asked suddenly. Iron Bear looked up from his work. I didn't seek you specifically. I was tracking Creed's men, following their trail from the place where they killed my family. The spirits led me to your path. You believe the spirits led you? Many things guide us, he replied. Knowledge, instinct, fortune. Call it what you wish. I was meant to find you. The simple certainty in his voice was oddly comforting. Sarah had been raised with Christianity, had attended church services in Boston with her family, but this was different, a spirituality woven into daily life rather than confined to Sunday mornings. As the fire burned lower, Iron Bear began to prepare their sleeping arrangements. He laid out furs and blankets, creating a comfortable space for Sarah while positioning his own bedroll where he could watch all approaches to their camp. From his pack, he withdrew a rifle, checking its loading before placing it within easy reach. "Will you keep watch all night?" Sarah asked. "I sleep lightly," he replied. "Rest comes in small pieces when you travel alone in dangerous country, but tonight you sleep deep. Heal. I will guard." Sarah settled into the furs, surprised by their warmth and softness. The day's travel had exhausted her more than she realized, and despite her fears, she felt sleep pulling at her. Iron Bear sat by the fire, his silhouette strong against the flames, and Sarah was reminded of her father sitting up with her when she was sick, a guardian presence in the darkness. "Iron Bear?" she said softly. "Yes, little one? Thank you for saving me, for—" She struggled to find the words, "for not leaving me alone." He was quiet for a moment, then spoke in a voice so low she almost missed the words. "We save each other, Sarah Bennett." The spirits knew what they were doing. Sleep came gradually, filled with dreams that mixed memory and present reality. Sometimes she was back in the wagon with her family, sometimes riding gentle rain through an endless landscape. But throughout the dreams, she sensed a protective presence, a watchful guardian who would not let harm come to her. She woke once in the deep of night to find the fire burned low to embers. Iron Bear was a dark shape against the stars, still, maintaining his vigil. He must have heard her movement because he turned slightly. "Sleep, little one," he said softly. "Dawn is still far away." Sarah closed her eyes again, feeling safer than she had since the attack. In the morning, they would continue their journey to Iron Bear's people. What reception awaited her there? She couldn't know. But for now, in this moment, she was protected, cared for by a man who understood loss as deeply as she did. The night passed peacefully, marked only by the normal sounds of the wilderness and the occasional crack of wood in the dying fire. When Sarah woke again, it was to the first pale light of dawn painting the eastern sky. Iron Bear was already moving about the camp, preparing for another day of travel. He smiled when he saw her awake, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, revealing glimpses of the man he must have been before tragedy marked him. "Good morning, Sarah Bennett. How do you feel?" Sarah tested her ankle carefully. "Better. It still hurts, but not as much." "Good. Today we will reach the edge of my people's territory. Tonight, if all goes well, we sleep in the village." A flutter of nervousness touched Sarah's stomach. What would these people think of her? Would they welcome a white child, or would they see her as an enemy, a reminder of all the harm her people had done to theirs? Iron Bear seemed to sense her apprehension. As he helped her prepare for the day's journey, he spoke reassuringly. "My sister, White Dove, is a medicine woman. She has great skill with healing. She will help your ankle. And my cousin, Running Wolf, has children near your age. You will not be alone." The thought of other children both excited and frightened Sarah. It had been only days since she lost everything, and the idea of being around others, of trying to be normal, seemed impossible. But she nodded, trusting Iron Bear's judgment as she had quickly learned to do. They broke camp as the sun cleared the horizon, erasing all signs of their presence with careful efficiency. Iron Bear lifted Sarah onto gentle rein with the same care he had shown the day before, checking that she was secure and comfortable before they set out. The morning's travel took them through increasingly dramatic landscape. They followed game trails that wound between massive rock formations, crossed clear mountain streams, and climbed steadily into country that felt wilder and more remote than anything Sarah had experienced. "This is sacred land to my people," Iron Bear explained as they paused to rest the horses. "The spirits are strong here. White men rarely come this way. The terrain is too difficult for wagons, too far from their settlements." Sarah could feel something different about this place, though she couldn't have explained what. The very air seemed charged with presence, as if the land itself were alive and watching. It should have been frightening, but instead she felt a strange sense of welcome, as if the mountains recognized her need for sanctuary. As they rode, Iron Bear pointed out landmarks that had names and stories in his culture. That peak where an eagle had carried a child to safety. This stream where a great battle had been fought between his people and their enemies generations ago. Each feature of the landscape was woven into a tapestry of meaning that stretched back beyond memory. "My people have traveled these paths for more generations than can be counted," he said. "My grandfather's grandfather knew these trails." Sarah thought about her own family's history: immigrants from Ireland, city dwellers, factory workers. Her roots seemed shallow by comparison, easily torn up and scattered by violence. Yet here was Iron Bear, connected to this land by ties that ran deeper than she could imagine, and he too had been devastated by loss. Tragedy, it seemed, recognized no boundaries. The sun was high overhead when Iron Bear suddenly held up his hand, signaling for silence. He'd been walking beside gentle rain, but now he moved ahead cautiously, studying something on the ground. When he returned, his expression was troubled. Riders passed this way, 5, maybe 6, moving fast toward the mountains. "Creed's men?" Sarah asked, fear tightening her throat. "Perhaps, or others. These are troubled times, many dangerous men in the territory." He looked at her assessingly. "Can you ride faster if needed? Hold on tight." Sarah nodded, gripping gentle Rain's mane along with the reins. "We take a different path, longer but safer. Stay close to me." They left the main trail, following what seemed to be barely a deer track through thick brush. Iron Bear led his horse now, rather than riding, picking their way carefully through terrain that would have been impassable for the wagon train. Sarah had to duck frequently to avoid low branches, and more than once, gentle Rain had to scramble over fallen logs or rocky obstacles. The detour added hours to their journey, but Iron Bear's caution proved justified. As they crested a ridge in late afternoon, he pointed to dust rising in the valley they had avoided. "There, riders moving north. We were wise to go around." Sarah studied the distant dust cloud, trying to imagine the men who might be creating it. Were they Creed's killers, searching for witnesses, army patrols, other travelers with their own purposes? The uncertainty was almost worse than knowing would have been. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the landscape opened into a broad valley bordered by pine-covered slopes. A river wound through the center, its waters catching the golden light. And there, nestled in a bend of the river, Sarah saw the first signs of Iron Bear's village, thin columns of smoke rising from among the trees. "Home," Iron Bear said simply. But Sarah heard the complex emotions in that single word. They paused at the valley's rim, and Iron Bear uttered a calling cry that echoed across the space. It was answered moments later by a similar call from below. He nodded in satisfaction. "The scouts know we come, they will tell the village." As they descended into the valley, Sarah's nervousness grew. She could see movement now among the trees, people emerging to watch their approach. Children ran ahead of them, calling out in the Lakota language. Adults followed more slowly there, expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness as they registered the presence of the white child on gentle rein. A woman emerged from the gathering crowd, moving with quick, purposeful strides. She was perhaps 30 winters old, with Iron Bear's strong features softened by feminine grace. Her dark hair was woven into elaborate braids decorated with beadwork, and she wore a dress of soft doe skin adorned with intricate quillwork. "My sister," Iron Bear said, "White Dove." The woman reached them as Iron Bear helped Sarah dismount. Her dark eyes took in everything: Sarah's injured ankle, her blood-stained dress, the exhaustion written on her young face. When she spoke, it was in Lakota, rapid words that Sarah couldn't understand, but which seemed to be questioning. Iron Bear replied in the same language, his explanation lengthy and detailed. Sarah caught her own name several times, and creed, spoken with particular venom. As he spoke, White Dove's expression shifted from suspicion to understanding to something that might have been compassion. When Iron Bear finished, White Dove stepped closer to Sarah. She placed gentle hands on the girl's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. Then, to Sarah's surprise, she spoke in English. "You are hurt in body and spirit," she said, her accent heavy but her words clear. "I am a healer. I will help." She looked at her brother. "Take her to my lodge. I will gather what is needed." Relief flooded through Sarah. Whatever else awaited her in this village, she would not face it alone. Iron Bear had brought her to safety, to people who, despite all the reasons they had to mistrust her kind, were choosing to help a child in need. As they made their way through the village, Sarah saw dozens of dwellings, not the simple conical teepees she had imagined, but sturdy structures covered with hides, some quite large and elaborate. People watched their passage with undisguised curiosity. Some of the looks were hostile, others merely interested, but many showed the universal sympathy adults feel for an obviously injured and frightened child. White Dove's lodge filled with the warm glow of morning sunlight filtering through the smoke hole above. Sarah stirred on her bed of soft furs, her body still aching from the long journey, but her ankle noticeably improved thanks to the medicine. Woman's skilled treatment. The aroma of brewing herbs and cooking meat drew her fully awake, and she found White Dove tending several pots over the central fire. "Ah, you wake," White Dove said, her English careful but warm. "Good. Today, we strengthen you more. The Creator gives us time to heal before the next challenge comes." Sarah sat up slowly, accepting the wooden bowl of rich broth that White Dove offered. As she sipped the nourishing liquid, she watched the older woman move about the lodge with practiced efficiency. Despite being Iron Bear's sister, White Dove carried herself with an entirely different energy. Where her brother was quiet intensity and contained sorrow, she radiated a fierce, protective strength mixed with healing wisdom. "Your brother," Sarah began hesitantly, "he saved my life, but I sense he's very sad." White Dove paused in her work, her dark eyes meeting Sarah's with understanding. "Iron Bear carries heavy stones in his heart. When Morning Star and Little Crow were taken from us, something in him broke. But," she studied Sarah thoughtfully, "perhaps the spirit sent you to help mend what was broken. Sometimes healing comes from unexpected places." Before Sarah could respond, excited voices erupted outside the lodge. Children were calling out in Lakota, their words urgent and overlapping. White Dove moved quickly to the entrance, exchanging rapid words with someone outside. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Riders approach," she explained to Sarah. "Many of them. Not soldiers, others. The scouts say they carry weapons and move with purpose." Fear shot through Sarah's body like ice water. Could it be Creed's men? Had they somehow tracked her here? She struggled to stand, but White Dove placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Stay calm, little one. Our warriors are ready. The village has strong protection, but we must be wise. She helped Sarah into the new clothing, the soft doe-skin dress and leggings that felt strange but comforting against her skin. If there is danger, you follow my words exactly, understand? Sarah nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, she could hear the organized chaos of a community preparing for potential threat. Horses being readied, weapons checked, children being gathered into protective groups. The efficiency spoke of a people long accustomed to danger. Iron Bear appeared at the lodge entrance, his face grim. He carried his rifle and had additional weapons strapped to his body, knives, a tomahawk, a bow, and quiver of arrows. Despite the martial appearance, his first concern was for Sarah. "Are you frightened?" he asked directly. "Yes," Sarah admitted, seeing no point in false bravery. "Good. Fear keeps us alert, but you are safe here. The village has never been successfully attacked when we were prepared." He exchanged words with his sister in Lakota, then added, "White Dove will take you and the other children to the sheltered place if fighting comes. For now, we wait and watch." Through the lodge opening, Sarah could see warriors taking positions throughout the village. They moved with practiced coordination, some visible as a show of strength, others concealing themselves in strategic locations. Women and older children armed themselves as well. This was clearly a community where everyone knew their role in defense. Red Sky appeared, slightly out of breath from running. Despite the tension, he grinned at Sarah. "Exciting day for your second morning with us?" he said in his carefully pronounced English. "Do not worry. Our warriors are the finest fighters in all the lands. These fools who come, if they mean harm, will learn hard lessons." His confidence was reassuring, even if Sarah suspected it contained some youthful bravado. She managed a small smile in return. "Does this happen often, armed groups approaching?" "Sometimes," Red Sky admitted. "Other bands, war parties, white men seeking trouble. But Chief Standing Elk is wise. He knows when to fight, when to talk. Most times, talking is enough." Warrior Sarah didn't recognize entered the lodge and spoke urgently to White Dove. Her expression darkened as she listened, and she turned to the children with sharp commands in Lakota. Red Sky translated quickly. "She says to prepare to move to the hidden canyon. The approaching riders are not friendly. They wear mixed clothing, some soldier uniforms, some civilian. The scouts count at least 30 men." 30. The number made Sarah's stomach clench. The village had many warriors, but 30 armed men was a significant force. And the mixed clothing. It sounded disturbingly like Creed's method of operation. White Dove was already packing essential supplies: medicines, food, water skins, blankets. She moved with urgent efficiency while maintaining an air of calm control that helped steady Sarah's nerves. Other women and children began filing past the lodge, heading toward whatever secure location had been designated for such emergencies. "Come," White Dove commanded, shouldering her pack. "We go now." But before they could leave, a commotion erupted outside. Shouting in both Lakota and English, the sound of horses, and then gunshots. Not the organized volley of military discipline, but scattered firing that spoke of chaos and confusion. Iron Bear burst into the lodge. "They attacked! Our scouts without warning. Fighting has begun." He looked at his sister. "Take the children to safety, now!" White Dove nodded, grabbing Sarah's hand. But as they moved toward the entrance, a group of riders thundered past, firing into the lodges. Sarah caught a glimpse of scarred faces, wild eyes, and mixed clothing that confirmed her worst fears. These weren't random raiders or territorial competitors. These were men connected to Creed, come to silence the witness who could expose their crimes. "Back!" Iron Bear shouted, pushing them away from the entrance as bullets tore through the hide covering. He positioned himself between them and the opening, his rifle ready. The sound of battle intensified outside. War cries, gunfire, the thunder of hooves, screams of pain and rage. The organized defense the village had prepared was being tested by the sudden, violent assault. White Dove pulled Sarah and Red Sky toward the back of the lodge. But there was no rear exit. They were trapped until the immediate fighting moved, away from their location. Iron Bear fired through the entrance, his shots careful and deliberate. Sarah could hear return fire striking the lodge poles, see daylight through new holes in the hide walls. "Stay down," White Dove commanded, pushing. Both children flat against the ground. She had produced a revolver from somewhere in her clothing and held it with steady hands, ready to defend her charges. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah pressed herself against the earth, Red Sky beside her, both trying to become as small as possible. The sounds were terrifying. Not the organized warfare of armies, but the savage chaos of a raid, brutal and personal. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shooting around their lodge decreased. Iron Bear risked a look outside, then spoke rapidly to his sister. She nodded and began pulling the children to their feet. "The raiders are being pushed back," she explained quickly, "but they regroup for another attack. We must reach the canyon now, while we have this chance." They emerged from the lodge into a scene of controlled chaos. The initial surprise of the attack had passed, and the Lakota warriors had rallied. Bodies lay in the dirt, some raiders, some villagers. Smoke rose from several lodges where fires had started. Wounded were being tended even as the fighting continued on the village's periphery. White Dove led them swiftly through the confusion, Iron Bear protecting their rear. They joined a stream of non-combatants moving toward the hills behind the village. Sarah limped as fast as she could, her injured ankle protesting but adrenaline, keeping her moving. They had nearly reached the relative safety of the tree line when disaster struck. A group of raiders had circled around the main fighting, attempting to cut off the escape route. They burst from concealment among the rocks, firing at the fleeing women and children. "Run!" Iron Bear shouted, stepping forward to engage the attackers. His rifle cracked repeatedly, and Sarah saw 2 raiders fall. But there were too many, and they were too close. White Dove pushed the children behind a large boulder, then joined her brother in the fight. Her revolver barked steadily, and it was deadly accurate. For a moment, it seemed they might hold off the attackers. Then Sarah saw him. Among the raiders was a face burned into her memory. One of Creed's lieutenants, a cruel-eyed man she'd heard called Dutch Holland. He recognized her at the same moment, and his face twisted with vicious satisfaction. "There's the girl," he shouted. "Take her alive! Creed wants her to disappear proper-like." The raiders' focus shifted, concentrating their fire on Iron Bear and White Dove, while others moved to flank the boulder where Sarah and Red Sky were hidden. Sarah realized with sick certainty that these men had come specifically for her. The attack on the village was about eliminating the witness who could destroy their operation. Iron Bear fought like a man possessed, understanding that Sarah's life depended on his ability to hold the raiders back. He had exhausted his rifle ammunition and now wielded it as a club, then drew his knife as riders closed in. Sarah watched in horror as he took down one attacker, then another, fighting with desperate fury. But there were too many. A rifle butt struck him from behind, sending him to his knees. Before he could recover, another raider's pistol was pressed to his head. "Stop fighting, squaw, or your brother dies," Dutch Holland commanded. White Dove froze, her revolver still raised. In that moment of hesitation, she was overwhelmed, wrestled to the ground by multiple attackers. Iron Bear struggled to rise, but was beaten down again. "Now then," Holland said, his voice oily with false courtesy, "let's have the girl come out nice and peaceful-like. No need for more killing if she cooperates." Sarah felt Red Sky tense beside her, ready to fight despite the hopelessness of their situation. She put her hand on his arm, knowing that resistance would only lead to more death. These men had come for her. If her surrender could save the others. "I'll come," she called out, her voice trembling but determined. "Just don't hurt anyone else." She emerged from behind the boulder, hands raised. Holland's grin was predatory, as he gestured for his men to grab her. Rough hands seized her arms, and she was dragged toward the waiting horses. "No!" Iron Bear roared, surging up despite his injuries. He managed to break free for a moment, charging toward Sarah's captors with his knife drawn. The gunshot was devastatingly loud. Sarah screamed as Iron Bear stumbled, blood blooming across his chest. He fell to his knees, then pitched forward, the knife falling from nerveless fingers. "Stupid savage," Holland spat. "Well, that's one less witness to worry about." White Dove's anguished cry tore through the air. She fought against her captors with renewed fury, but they held her fast. Red Sky had been grabbed as well. Warriors from the village were running toward them, alerted by the gunfire, but they were still too far away. "Mount up," Holland commanded. "We got what we came for." Sarah was thrown across a saddle like a sack of grain, the raider mounting behind her. As the horse wheeled around, she caught a last glimpse of Iron Bear lying motionless in the dirt. White Dove struggling to reach him, and Red Sky's face twisted with rage and grief. Then they were galloping away, leaving carnage and sorrow in their wake. Sarah's last coherent thought before shock and despair overwhelmed her was that she had brought death to another family, another group of people who had shown her nothing but kindness. The ride was a nightmare blur of pounding hooves, dust, and pain. Sarah's position across the saddle made breathing difficult, and her ribs felt like they might crack from the constant impacts. The raiders rode hard, putting distance between themselves and any pursuit. After what might have been an hour, they finally slowed. Sarah was hauled upright, now sitting in front of her captor. She could see they were heading into rougher country. Deep ravines, twisted rock formations, terrain that would make tracking difficult. "Well now," Holland said, riding up beside them. "That was exciting, wasn't it? Creed's gonna be real pleased we got you back. Though I gotta say, I'm curious why he wants you breathing. After what you've seen, what you might have told them savages. Seems like a bullet would be simpler." The raider holding Sarah chuckled. "Boss has his reasons. Probably wants to make real sure she can't never testify. Dead girls sometimes leave inconvenient evidence. Better she just disappears." Their casual discussion of her fate sent cold terror through Sarah's body. She thought of her family, of Iron Bear bleeding in the dirt, of all the death that seemed to follow her. Perhaps it would be better if she simply gave up. Let them do whatever they planned. What was the point of fighting when it only brought suffering to others? But then she remembered Iron Bear's words about choosing how to respond to what happens to us. He had chosen to help her despite his own losses. White Dove had chosen to heal rather than hate. The entire village had chosen to protect a stranger's child when they had every reason to turn her away. She couldn't give up. She owed them more than surrender. The raiders' base was a series of caves and rough structures built into a box canyon. It was a natural fortress. One way in, steep walls on all sides, defensive positions commanding the entrance. Sarah counted at least a dozen more men as they rode in, bringing Creed's force to around 40 fighters. She was dragged from the horse and shoved into a small cave that had been fitted with a crude wooden door. Inside was nothing but dirty straw and a bucket. The door slammed shut, and she heard a heavy bar drop into place outside. Alone in the darkness, Sarah finally allowed herself to cry. She wept for her murdered family, for Iron Bear who had died, trying to protect her, for White Dove and Red Sky and all the others who had suffered because of her presence. The tears seemed endless, grief and guilt mixing into a poison that threatened to consume her from within. Time lost meaning in the dark cave. Occasionally, someone would open the door to throw in food or water, but no one spoke to her. She could hear activity outside, men talking, horses moving, the general sounds of a camp, But inside her prison, there was only darkness and despair. She might have been there for days when the door finally opened to admit more than just her basic needs. Luther Creed himself stood in the entrance, backlit by torchlight. He had to stoop to enter the low cave, and when he straightened, he seemed to fill the entire space. "Well, well," he said, his scarred face twisting into an approximation of a smile. "Little Miss Bennett, you've caused me considerable trouble, girl." Sarah pressed herself against the cave's back wall, trying to become invisible. Creed moved closer, and she could smell whiskey and tobacco on his breath. "Nothing to say. You were plenty talkative when you were spreading lies about me to anyone who'd listen, telling folks I killed your family, that I dress up like an Indian." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. Very inconvenient, having a witness running around. Bad for business. "It's not lies," Sarah whispered, finding a spark of defiance despite her terror. "I saw you. I saw everything." Creed's hand shot out, gripping her chin roughly. "What you saw was what I wanted you to see, just like everyone else, but you had to survive, had to run to them savages, had to start people asking questions." He released her and stepped back, his expression calculating. "You know what your testimony's already cost me. Army's been sniffing around, asking about raids that don't fit the pattern. Some of my buyers are getting nervous, all because one little girl couldn't have the decency to die with her family." The casual cruelty of his words hit Sarah like physical blows. But underneath the fear, she felt something else stirring. Anger, not the hot rage of the moment, but a cold, steady fury at this man who dealt in death and deception as casually as others dealt in grain or cattle. "Iron Bear knew what you were," she said, her voice stronger. "Others know too. Killing me won't change that." Creed laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the cave walls. "That savage I shot back at the village. He's past caring about anything. Now as for others, well, Indians killing Indians ain't exactly news, and when they find what's left of that village after my boys are done, won't be many others left to know anything." The implications of his words struck Sarah like a sledgehammer. "You're going back? But why? You already have me." "Loose ends," Creed said with a shrug. "Can't have survivors telling tales. Besides, a proper massacre will keep the army busy. Get them focused on punishing the guilty Indians instead of investigating inconvenient truths." Sarah's mind raced. The village, White Dove, Red Sky, all the people who had shown her kindness. They were in mortal danger because of her. She had to do something, had to warn them somehow. Creed studied her face, seeming to read her thoughts. "Don't go getting ideas, girl. You ain't going nowhere. And after tomorrow night won't be anyone left to warn anyway." He turned to leave, then paused at the entrance. "Enjoy your time thinking about that, knowing that everyone who helped you is gonna die because of it. Pleasant dreams." The door slammed shut, leaving Sarah once again in darkness. But this time, despair didn't overwhelm her. Instead, she felt a clear, cold determination settling over her. She would not let the Lakota village be destroyed because of her. She would not let Creed's evil go unchallenged. But how? She was locked in a cave, surrounded by armed men, with no weapons and no allies. What could one injured girl do against such odds? As if in answer to her desperate thoughts, she heard a sound that didn't belong, a soft scraping from somewhere near the back of the cave. She froze, listening intently. There it was again, like something moving against stone. Who's there?" she whispered. The scraping stopped, then, so quiet she almost missed it, came a familiar voice. "Yellow bird." Duh. Sarah's heart leaped. It was the Lakota name Red Sky had given her when teaching her words. Someone from the village was here. But how? The scraping resumed, and Sarah realized it was coming from low on the back wall. She crawled toward the sound, her hands exploring the stone surface until she found a small opening, barely more than a crack, but it seemed to lead somewhere. Red Sky, she whispered urgently. No, I am Spotted Elk, scout for Standing Elk's band. We tracked the raiders here. I found this passage. It leads to small cave above. Can you fit through? Sarah felt the opening. It was narrow, barely wide. Enough for her shoulders, but she was small for her age. I think so, but there's a guard outside my door. We know warriors are positioned waiting for signal, but first you must escape. When fighting starts, confusion will help. Can you climb through? The prospect of squeezing through an unknown passage in complete darkness terrified her, but the alternative, staying here while Creed carried out his plan to destroy the village, was worse. I'll try, she said. The next several minutes were among the most frightening of Sarah's life. The passage was not only narrow, but twisted, requiring her to contort her body in painful ways. Sharp rocks tore at her skin and clothes. More than once, she thought she was stuck, panic rising in her throat. But each time, she managed to work herself free, driven by the knowledge that lives depended on her escape. Finally, gasping and bleeding from numerous scrapes, she emerged into a slightly larger space. Hands reached out to steady her, and she found herself face to face with a young Lakota warrior she didn't recognize. I am Spotted Elk, he said in careful English. You are hurt? I'm fine, Sarah gasped, though she was anything but. Please, we have to warn the village. Creed is planning to attack again, to kill everyone. Spotted Elk nodded grimly. We suspected this. 20 warriors wait nearby. Chief Standing Elk sent us to recover you and stop these men. But he hesitated. We have other news. Iron Bear lives. The words hit Sarah like a physical shock. What? But I saw him shot. He fell. Bullet struck here. Spotted. Elk touched his upper chest. Bad wound, but White Dove's medicine is strong. He lives, though weak. He made us promise to find you. Hope flowered in Sarah's chest for the first time in days. Iron Bear was alive. The man who had saved her, who had become like a father to her in their brief time together, hadn't died because of her. We must move now, Spotted Elk continued. Dawn comes soon. The attack on these men begins when sun touches the canyon rim. You must be away before then. He led her through a confusing series of passages and narrow ledges. Sarah realized they were inside the canyon wall itself, moving through natural fissures in the rock. It was dangerous. One slip would mean a fatal fall, but it kept them hidden from the raiders below. They emerged onto a high ledge where 3 other warriors waited with horses. The pre-dawn sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Below them, Sarah could see Creed's camp beginning to stir as men emerged from caves and rough shelters. You take her back to village, Spotted Elk instructed one of the warriors. Tell Standing Elk what we have learned. We will deal with these killers. But Sarah grabbed his arm. Wait, I know their plans, their numbers. Let me help. Spotted Elk looked skeptical. You are a child. This is warriors' work. I've seen more death than most warriors, Sarah replied with quiet intensity. And I'm the reason these men came. To your village. Let me help make it right. The warriors exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. Finally, Spotted Elk nodded slowly. What do you know? Sarah quickly shared everything she'd overheard in the camp, numbers of men, their planned attack on the village, the layout of the defensive positions. The warriors listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. This is valuable, Spotted Elk admitted, but you still must go. The fighting will be... He was interrupted by a commotion from below. Someone had discovered Sarah's empty cell. Shouts erupted across the camp as raiders scrambled for weapons and horses. No! Time now, Spotted Elk said grimly. The battle begins early. Yellowbird, stay with Running Hawk. He will protect you. What followed was unlike any of the violence Sarah had witnessed before. This wasn't the chaotic slaughter of the wagon train or the desperate defense of the village. This was calculated warfare, as 20 Lakota warriors used superior knowledge of the terrain to systematically dismantle a force twice their size. The warriors struck from multiple directions simultaneously. Arrows flew from concealed positions, picking off sentries before they could raise alarms. Small groups of raiders found themselves isolated and overwhelmed. The narrow canyon that had seemed such a perfect fortress became a trap, with no room to maneuver and death raining from the high walls. Sarah watched from her high perch, running, Hawk keeping her safely behind cover while still allowing her to observe. She saw Dutch Holland trying to organize a defense, only to take an arrow through his throat. She saw men who had laughed about murdering her family now crying out in fear and pain as justice found them. But she didn't see Creed. The battle was turning decisively in the Lakota's favor when she spotted him. Creed and 5 of his most trusted men had slipped away from the main fighting, heading for a hidden exit at the canyon's far end. They were escaping, and from their direction, they were heading toward the Lakota village. "There!" she shouted to Running Hawk, pointing. "Creed's getting away! He's going to the village!" Running Hawk looked where she pointed, his expression hardening as he recognized the danger. He raised his bow, but the range was too great. The escaping raiders disappeared into a narrow defile that would take them out of the canyon by a back route. "We must warn the village," Running Hawk said urgently. He turned to signal Spotted Elk, but the war leader was engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat below. Sarah made a decision that would have terrified her days ago. "I know a shorter way," she said, "through the passages inside the rock. I memorized the route when Spotted Elk led me through." Running Hawk looked uncertain. "Too dangerous. More dangerous to let Creed reach the village first," Sarah countered. "I can do this, I have to." Something in her expression must have convinced him. Running Hawk nodded tersely. "I follow you. Move fast." Sarah plunged back into the narrow passages she'd traversed earlier. This time, she moved with desperate speed, ignoring the rocks that tore at her skin, the drops that yawned beside narrow ledges. Behind her, she could hear Running Hawk following, his breathing harsh in the confined spaces. The passages seemed endless, but Sarah's memory proved true. They emerged from the canyon well ahead of Creed's position, with a clear view of the trail that led toward the Lakota village. In the growing morning light, she could see dust rising in the distance. Creed and his remaining men riding hard. "I'll try to slow them," Running Hawk said, nocking an arrow. "You take my horse, ride. To village, warn them." "I can't ride well enough," Sarah protested. "Not at the speed we need." Running Hawk's shot missed its mark, the raiders too distant and moving too fast. He cursed in Lakota, then made a decision. "Then we ride together. Hold tight." He lifted Sarah onto his horse, then mounted behind her. With a sharp cry, he urged the animal into a gallop, taking a dangerous shortcut down the rocky slope that would either cut precious minutes from their journey or send them tumbling to their deaths. The ride was terrifying and exhilarating. Running Hawk proved to be an exceptional horseman, guiding their mount through terrain that seemed impassable. Sarah clung to the horse's mane, trusting in the warrior's skill as they flew across the landscape. They were gaining on Creed's group, but would it be enough? The village was still miles away, and the raiders had a significant head start. Sarah's mind raced, trying to think of solutions. Then she remembered something Spotted Elk had mentioned: signal fires. "The signal peaks!" she shouted over the wind. "Can we light them?" Running Hawk understood immediately. The Lakota had a system of high points where fires could be lit to send messages across great distances. It was faster than any rider, but they would have to detour to reach the nearest peak, costing precious time. "Hold on!" Running Hawk shouted, wheeling the horse onto a steep trail that led upward. They climbed rapidly, the horse's sides heaving with effort. Below them, Sarah could see Creed's group continuing toward the village, unaware they were being paralleled by riders above. The signal peak came into view, a rocky promontory with a prepared pile of wood and kindling. Running Hawk leaped from the horse before it had fully stopped, racing to the signal fire. He struck sparks with practiced efficiency, and soon smoke was rising. But it wasn't enough. They needed flame, lots of it, to be seen from the village. "Green branches," Sarah said, remembering something Iron Bear had taught her. "For more smoke." Together, they threw green pine boughs onto the growing fire. The smoke turned thick and white, billowing into the morning sky. Running Hawk added specific materials that changed the smoke's color, creating a pattern that would convey not just danger, but its nature and direction. Far in the distance, Sarah saw an answering smoke rise from another peak. The message was being relayed. The village would be warned. But would it be in time? They remounted and continued their desperate race, now angling to intercept Creed's path. The terrain grew more familiar. Sarah recognized landmarks from her journey to the village with Iron Bear. They were close now, so close. The sound of gunfire shattered the morning air. Sarah's heart sank. They were too late. Creed had reached the village first, but as they crested the final ridge, Sarah saw something that filled her with fierce hope. The village wasn't taken by surprise. Warriors were in defensive positions, women and children already moving to safety. The signal fires had worked. The Lakota were ready. Creed and his 5 men had ridden straight into a trap. As they approached what they thought would be an unsuspecting village, they found themselves facing dozens of armed warriors. The raiders wheeled their horses, trying to retreat, but more warriors emerged from concealment behind them. Running Hawk didn't slow their pace, riding full speed toward the confrontation. Sarah saw Creed break free from the closing trap, spurring his horse toward the village itself. Whether he hoped to find hostages or was simply running on desperate instinct, she couldn't know. But his path would take him directly past White Dove's lodge. "No," Sarah breathed, remembering that Iron Bear lay wounded inside. As they thundered into the village, Sarah saw White Dove emerge from her lodge, revolver in hand. Creed was bearing down on her, his own weapon raised. Time seemed to slow as Sarah watched the 2 guns come level, saw fingers tighten on triggers. The shots rang out simultaneously. White Dove staggered but kept her feet. Creed jerked in his saddle, his shot going wide. He tried to wheel his horse around, but White Dove fired again and again, each shot finding its mark. Luther Creed toppled from his horse, landing heavily in the dust. He tried to rise, clawing for his fallen gun, but strength failed him. The architect of so much death and deception moved once more, then lay still. Running Hawk brought their lathered horse to a stop near White Dove, who was clutching her left shoulder, where Creed's bullet had found its mark. Sarah slid from the saddle and ran to the medicine woman. "You're hurt." White Dove managed a tight smile. "I've treated worse. The evil one." Sarah looked at Creed's motionless form. Dead. Around them, the brief battle was ending. Creed's remaining men, caught between warriors in the village and reinforcements arriving from the signal system, had surrendered. The threat was over, this time for good. As the adrenaline faded, Sarah felt her legs give way. She sat in the dirt, suddenly aware of her numerous cuts and bruises, the complete exhaustion that days of captivity and fear had brought. But underneath, it all was a different feeling. Not triumph exactly, but a sense of completion. The man who had destroyed her first family and threatened her second was gone. The truth about his crimes would be known. Strong hands lifted her gently. She looked up to find Iron Bear, pale and moving stiffly but very much alive. His chest was heavily bandaged, and he leaned on a walking stick, but his dark eyes were warm as they met hers. "Little warrior," he said softly. "Once again you survive. Once again you bring truth with you." Sarah threw her arms around him, careful of his wound. "I thought you were dead. I thought I'd caused your death too." Iron Bear held her as she cried, his own eyes suspiciously moist. "Death comes when it will," he said, "but not today. The spirits still have work for us." As the village dealt with the aftermath of the attack, treating wounded and securing prisoners, Sarah found herself at the center of a gathering. Chief Standing Elk himself came to hear her story, to understand all that had transpired. She told them everything: her capture, what she'd learned in Creed's camp, the planned attack on the village, her escape with Spotted Elk's help. The chief listened gravely, occasionally asking questions through interpreters. When she finished, Standing Elk was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, his words translated by Iron Bear. "The Creator works in mysterious ways. From great evil, sometimes good emerges. The white child we rescued has helped save our village. The truth she carries has ended a great deception. This is powerful medicine." He gestured to one of his advisors, who brought forward a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. Standing Elk opened it to reveal a beautifully crafted necklace, leather cord strung with beads, bear claws, and a central pendant made from turquoise and silver. "This marks you as daughter of our band," the chief said through Iron Bear. "You have earned your place among us through courage and sacrifice. Whether you stay or go, you will always have a home here." Sarah accepted the necklace with trembling hands, understanding the profound honor being bestowed. She looked around at the faces surrounding her: Iron Bear, wounded but proud; White Dove, smiling despite her injury; Red Sky, grinning broadly; Spotted Elk and Running Hawk, nodding their approval. These people had taken her in when she had nothing, protected her at great cost to themselves, and now offered her a permanent place in their community. The loneliness and despair that had consumed her after her family's death seemed very far away, but even as she felt the warmth of belonging, Sarah knew her journey wasn't over. Creed was dead, but the system that had allowed him to operate, the prejudices and hatreds he had exploited, remained. Her testimony was still needed, her voice as a witness to how division between peoples could be manipulated by those who profited from conflict. "I'm honored beyond words," she said carefully, "and I will always treasure this acceptance. But I think there's still work for me to do. There are others like Creed out there. Other lies that need to be exposed. Other bridges that need to be built between your people and mine." Standing Elk smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern features. "Wisdom beyond your years," he said through Iron Bear. "The offer stands always. This is your home when you need it." As the sun reached its zenith, word arrived that Spotted Elk and his warriors had successfully eliminated the remainder of Creed's band. The immediate threat was ended, though everyone knew others would arise. The frontier was still a place of conflict, misunderstanding, and exploitation. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. Sarah sat with Iron Bear outside White Dove's lodge, watching the village return to its normal rhythms. Children played, women worked, men tended to horses and weapons. Life continued, as it always did, flowing around tragedy and triumph alike. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Iron Bear was quiet for a long moment. "The army will need to know what occurred here. Your testimony will be important. They should believe you now. Too much has happened for them to dismiss the truth any longer. Captain Thornton and his patrol should be returning soon from their expedition. When they find what remains of Creed's operation, when they hear your account and that of our warriors, they will have to act." Sarah nodded, understanding the complexities that lay ahead. Her role as witness would continue, but now she carried additional weight: the trust of the Lakota people, the responsibility to speak for those whose voices were often ignored or dismissed by white authorities. 3 days later, Captain Thornton's patrol arrived at the village. The young officer's face showed shock as he took in the evidence of the recent battle, the captured raiders, and most of all, Sarah herself. Alive, well, and clearly integrated into the Lakota community. The meeting between Thornton and Chief Standing Elk was historic in its way. For perhaps the first time in that troubled region, a military officer sat in genuine consultation with native leadership, sharing information and coordinating their response to a threat that had endangered both communities. Sarah served as both witness and interpreter, her unique position allowing her to bridge not just languages, but cultural perspectives. She watched as initial wariness gave way to mutual respect, as both sides recognized their common interest in ending the kind of deceptive violence Creed had perpetrated. The surviving raiders were turned over to military custody, their testimony confirming everything Sarah had reported. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents found in Creed's stronghold detailed years of false flag operations, lists of attacks blamed on various tribes that had actually been carried out by his men, even correspondence with corrupt officials who had profited from the sustained conflict. As autumn painted the landscape in shades of gold and red, Sarah faced her most difficult decision yet. The army had located her uncle in Montana Territory. Patrick Bennett had responded immediately to news of her survival, expressing joy and eagerness to welcome her into his home. Captain Thornton offered to arrange safe passage for her journey west, but leaving meant separating from Iron Bear, White Dove, and the community that had become her second family. It meant stepping away from the world that had given her purpose, in the midst of tragedy that had shown her strength she never knew she possessed. One evening, as purple shadows lengthened across the village, Sarah sat with Iron Bear by the river. They had spent many such evenings together, sharing stories and silence with equal comfort. The warrior had recovered well from his wound, though he carried new scars to join the old ones. "I don't know what to do," Sarah admitted, throwing pebbles into the water. "My father wanted me to reach Montana to be with his family, but this feels like my family now." Iron Bear selected his own pebble, sending it skipping across the surface in a series of perfect bounces. "Family is not always about blood," he said carefully. "Sometimes it's about the bonds we choose, the connections that heal us. Your father wanted you safe, wanted you to have a future. That can take many forms. What would you want if I were your daughter?" The question hung in the air between them. Iron Bear was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if she had overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You are my daughter, in all ways that matter. Little Crow was taken from me, but the Spirit sent you to fill that emptiness. Not as replacement, but as new growth where something was torn away." He paused, choosing his words. "If you were my daughter by blood, I would want what I want for you now, to follow the path that calls to your spirit, to honor both your past and your future." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. In that moment, she understood what she needed to do. The answer had been there all along, waiting for her to recognize it. The next morning, she sought out Captain Thornton. The officer listened carefully as she explained her decision, nodding with understanding if not complete agreement. "I'll go to Montana," she said, "but only to meet my uncle, to honor my father's wishes and establish that connection. Then I want to return here, to learn, to grow, to help build understanding between the peoples. There's work to be done, bridges to be built. I've seen how lies and hatred can be used to divide us. I want to be part of the truth that brings us together." Thornton studied her thoughtfully. "That's an ambitious path for one so young. You'll face resistance from both sides. Whites who see you as tainted by your time with the Indians, natives, who might never fully trust a white person regardless of your experiences." "I know," Sarah replied, "but someone has to try. Someone who's seen both sides, who understands the cost of division. Iron Bear says the spirits led him to find me. For a reason. I'm beginning to believe he's right." The captain smiled slightly. "You've grown considerably since I first met you, Miss Bennett. Very well. I'll help arrange your journey to Montana, and I'll ensure the way remains open for your return. The Army could use more interpreters and cultural advisors who actually understand both worlds. Winter was approaching when Sarah finally departed for Montana. The entire village gathered to see her off, presenting gifts and blessings for her journey. White Dove gave her a medicine bundle with healing herbs and protective talismans. Red Sky offered a beautifully crafted pair of moccasins for the trail. Spotted Elk and Running Hawk presented her with a small bow and quiver, insisting she know how to defend herself properly. Chief Standing Elk performed a formal adoption ceremony, declaring before all that Sarah Bennett was now also Yellow Bird. Of the Lakota, daughter of the band, always welcome at their fires. The necklace he had given her earlier was joined by other symbols of belonging. An eagle feather for her hair, a painted marking on her forehead that proclaimed her protected status. Iron Bear would accompany her partway, ensuring her safe delivery to the military escort that would take her the rest of the way to Montana. As they rode out together in the crisp morning air, Sarah felt none of the terror that had marked her first departure from safety. Instead, there was anticipation mixed with melancholy, the bittersweet knowledge that goodbyes were also promises of return. They camped that night in a sheltered valley where the first snow of the season dusted the peaks around them. As they sat by their small fire, Iron Bear presented his final gift, a war shield, sized for her smaller frame, but crafted with all the care and spiritual significance of a warrior's protection. This carries medicine from both our peoples, he explained, tracing the painted symbols. The bear for strength and protection, the eagle for vision and courage. And here, the morning star, the bridge between night and day, between different worlds. Like you. Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth hide, feeling the power in the gift. I'll carry it always, she promised. And I'll come back. This isn't goodbye, it's... What's the Lakota word for until we meet again? Toxa Ache, Iron Bear replied, and you will use it often, I think. Your path will bring you back to us many times. The next day, they met Captain Thornton's escort at the agreed-upon location. The transition was handled with unexpected grace, the soldiers showing respect for Iron Bear and his position as Sarah's protector. As she prepared to continue her journey with the military escort, Sarah embraced the man who had become her second father. Toxa Ake, she whispered. Toxa Ake, daughter, he replied. The spirits watch over you. The journey to Montana took 2 weeks through increasingly wintry conditions. Sarah found herself serving as an unofficial bridge, even within the escort, helping the soldiers understand native perspectives they encountered along the way, mediating small disputes with tribal groups they met, demonstrating that cooperation was possible when both sides approached with respect and open minds. Patrick Bennett proved to be everything Sarah had hoped, a kind, generous man who welcomed her not just as an obligation, but as a precious gift. His wife, Mary, embraced her as the daughter they'd never had. Their homestead was comfortable and prosperous, offering all the security and opportunity her parents had dreamed of for their children. But even as she settled into this new life, learning the routines of the ranch, attending the local school, making friends among the other settlers' children, Sarah felt the pull of her other world. She maintained correspondence with Captain Thornton, following the progress of investigations into operations like Creed's. She practiced the Lakota language Red Sky had taught her, kept the traditions White Dove had shared, honored the spiritual practices that Iron Bear had shown her were not so different from her own faith when stripped of cultural trappings. Spring came to Montana in a rush of wildflowers and melting snow. With it came news that made Sarah's decision clear. The Army was organizing a series of peace councils between various tribes and territorial authorities. They needed interpreters, cultural advisors, people who could help both sides understand each other's perspectives. Captain Thornton had recommended her for an official position, young as she was. Her uncle and aunt, to their credit, understood when she explained her calling. They had seen the way she moved between worlds, the natural gift she had for bringing understanding where there had been suspicion. They gave their blessing for her to return to the Lakota lands with the promise that Montana would always be her home when she needed it. The reunion at the village was joyous. Sarah had been gone 6 months, but the bonds remained strong. Iron Bear, fully healed now, lifted her from her horse with the same gentle strength he'd shown when first rescuing her. White Dove examined her with a medicine woman's eye, pronouncing her stronger in body and spirit. Red Sky had grown taller and delighted in showing off his improved English, but it was Chief Standing Elk who perhaps best summarized what her return meant. Speaking at a formal council fire with the entire band assembled, he declared, "The circle is complete, but not closed. Our daughter went out into the world and returns bringing new wisdom. She will go out again and return again, each journey making the web of connections stronger. This is how peoples learn to live together, not through conquest or submission, but through the patient work of those who refuse to let difference become division." For the next several years, Sarah moved between worlds with increasing skill and influence. She served as interpreter at treaty negotiations, helped establish schools that respected both native and white educational traditions, and worked tirelessly to expose those who profited from cultural conflict. Her unique position, fully accepted in both communities, made her invaluable in building the small bridges of understanding that might someday support larger structures of peace. She spent seasons with the Lakota, deepening her knowledge of their ways, participating in ceremonies, learning the intricate oral histories that contained wisdom stretching back generations. She also maintained her connections to white society, using her education and family connections to advocate for native rights in forums where Indian voices were rarely heard. Iron Bear aged gracefully into an elder statesman role. His counsel, sought by chiefs and army officers alike. The bond between him and Sarah evolved, but never weakened, the connection between two souls who had found each other in the depths of loss and chosen to build something meaningful from shared sorrow. When white settlers needed to understand Lakota perspectives, they came to him. When the Lakota needed to navigate white legal systems, they turned to Sarah. Years later, when the first integrated school was established in the territory, a place where native and white children could learn side by side, sharing their cultures while preparing for a changing world, it seemed natural that Sarah Bennett, also known as Yellowbird, should be among its founders. At the dedication ceremony, she spoke words that echoed the wisdom she'd learned from both her families. "We cannot change the past, the losses we've suffered, the divisions that have marked our history. These are real and must be acknowledged. But we can choose how we move forward. We can choose to see each other as human beings first, to find common ground while respecting differences, to build a future where no child loses their family to hatred and lies." In the audience that day sat Iron Bear, his hair now silver, but his bearing still proud. Beside him were White Dove and Red Sky, now a warrior in his own right with children of his own. There too were Patrick and Mary Bennett, having made the journey from Montana to support their niece. Captain Thornton, now a colonel, represented the military that had learned the value of cultural understanding. And scattered throughout the crowd were dozens of others whose lives had been touched by a girl who'd refused to let tragedy define her limits. The school was just one small step, but it represented something larger. The possibility that from the ashes of violence and misunderstanding, something new and hopeful could grow, that bridges built by individuals brave enough to cross cultural divides might eventually support the weight of entire communities learning to live in harmony. As Sarah stood before the assembled crowd, wearing both the turquoise necklace of her Lakota adoption and a locket containing pictures of her birth family, she embodied the truth she had spent years learning and teaching. That identity need not be singular, that loyalty to one people need not mean enmity toward another, that the human heart is vast enough to hold multiple forms of belonging. The morning star, that bridge between night and day that decorated her shield, had become her symbol in both communities. Just as that star announced the coming dawn while the night still held sway, her work represented hope for a future where understanding might finally overcome the divisions that had caused so much pain. In quiet moments, Sarah sometimes wondered what her birth parents would think of the path her life had taken. She liked to believe they would be proud, not just of her survival, but of her choice to transform suffering into purpose, to honor their memory by working to prevent other families from experiencing such loss. The West was changing rapidly. The old ways of both native and settler communities were giving way to new realities. But in that change lay opportunity. The chance to write new stories, to create new traditions that honored the best of all cultures while leaving behind the prejudices and hatreds that had cost so many lives. Sarah Bennett, yellow bird of the Lakota, daughter of two worlds, continued her work with quiet determination. Each successful mediation, each child who learned to see beyond cultural stereotypes, each moment of genuine understanding between former enemies, these were her victories, small candles lit against the darkness of division. And sometimes, on clear mornings, when the morning star shone brightest just before dawn, she would think of a desperate child alone on the prairie and the warrior who had chosen compassion over bitterness. She would remember how the worst moment of her life had led to unexpected blessings, how loss had opened doors to new forms of love and purpose. The spirits, as Iron Bear had always said, knew what they were doing. From the ashes of one family, another had grown. From the tragedy of division, a bridge builder had emerged. And in the endless cycle of loss and renewal that marked the human experience, Sarah had found her place, standing between worlds, holding out her hands to both, inviting them to see each other not as enemies, but as relations in the great family of humanity. The work was far from finished. There would be setbacks, disappointments, new challenges with each changing season. But she would continue, supported by the love of both her families, guided by the wisdom of her experiences, carrying always the morning star's promise that light follows darkness, that understanding can triumph over ignorance, that the human heart has infinite capacity for healing and growth. In the end, that was her legacy, not just survival, but transformation, not just witness to tragedy, but architect of hope. Not just a bridge between cultures, but a living example that such bridges were possible, necessary, and ultimately the only path to a future where no child would have to choose between worlds, where all could belong fully to the human family. "Toxa ache," she would whisper to the wind, knowing that somewhere Iron Bear heard and understood. "Until we meet again," and they would, in this life or the next, bound by something stronger than blood, deeper than culture, the unbreakable connection of two souls who had chosen love over hate, understanding over division, hope over despair. The morning star continued to shine, herald of each new day's possibilities, symbol of the eternal truth that light eventually always follows darkness. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.